Hello, everybody. This is Tony Heil with ALS United Mid-Atlantic, and this is our Goals podcast, where we discuss the different perspectives impacting ALS, from people living with ALS to staff and caregivers, to researchers and more, to discuss ALS from every direction. Today, I'm really excited to talk more broadly about our ALS United network, and I'm talking with my friend Janie Dalrymple from ALS Arizona, and we're going to talk about her experience and what she does there to care for patients, including a special topic about mechanical ventilation and the questions you can ask to understand that better, how she handles sensitive issues, and how her team helps patients throughout the process of ventilation and through clinics. So, Janie, thank you so much for speaking today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So, I want to talk about your experience first. What is your background before you joined ALS Arizona?
So, I've been a nurse for 23 years now, and my background has been mostly in neurology. And so I have kind of that aspect, neurological aspect, anyhow. But I did, before joining ALS Arizona, work as a clinic coordinator for the ALS clinic at Mayo here in Arizona. So that's where I first got introduced to ALS patients.
And I don't think there's any real prep you can have for ALS. How did you adapt to caring for ALS patients? Because it's a very unique disease.
Yeah, very much so. So as a neurological nurse, even at the bedside, you just don't see ALS patients, right? It's still very rare. And so my first experience with ALS patients was in that multidisciplinary clinic and learning about it that way. So it's a very unique disease, and it's a lot of learning by working with those professionals and those neurologists that have really spent the time working with all those patients. And I think a lot of the learning process too is spending time with patients and families and hearing what they've gone through. Their trials, their tribulations, what works best, what doesn't work at all, and really having that compassion and empathy for just being able to understand, what they're going through and how best can we serve them with their unique need of dealing with this disease.
And one of the issues that you are helping people with is mechanical ventilation. What is mechanical ventilation, and how does it benefit a person with ALS?
Yeah, so mechanical ventilation is a topic that comes up a lot of time with ALS patients. As we all know, this is an incurable disease, and typically an ALS patient is going to succumb to respiratory failure. When they are in that respiratory distress, or those final stages, there is that option of choosing mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilation is that process of choosing a machine to provide that ventilation support when the person is no longer able to breathe on their own. So it's different than the non-invasive ventilator or the BiPAP machine that lots of patients with ALS have. That machine helps reduce the workload of the diaphragm, but the patient is still able to breathe on their own because that diaphragm is still working. So when the diaphragm stops working, when those motor neurons are no longer innervating that diaphragm muscle at all, then we have respiratory failure. We've got to find a different way to breathe, right? So patient has to decide, do I want to go that mechanical ventilation route and rely on a machine for my breathing ability, or am I succumbing to the disease and choosing to pass away? So there are lots of considerations to make with that decision, and I think that the topic gets touched on in the multidisciplinary clinic, but there are so many considerations and so much education that is needed around the topic that it's just not the most ideal place to hear about everything that's needed in the clinical setting. And so that's why I offer to do one-on-one evaluations with patients and families to really deep dive into their questions and figure out what is going to be the best scenario for them.
And with those questions, when should people start asking those questions? Because it's a very scary topic. I imagine when they are first diagnosed, it's not in their mind at all. So, is there a time when it's appropriate to begin asking questions like that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do for patients as well is I talk about their advanced directives, which can very much happen at the time of diagnosis, right? Like we really need to be thinking about if you have very strong opinions of how you want your end of life to be, or strong opinions about the ways that you want your healthcare decisions to go, that is the time to be writing down those things. And I think that the best time to make those decisions is when you are not in any kind of medical distress or duress and in a critical medical situation. You need time to think about it. What would I want in that situation? Discuss with your family and friends, the decisions that you're making. And so I really like to have those conversations early on with a patient when they've been diagnosed, so they have plenty of time to have those conversations. But that being said, mechanical ventilation needs to be one of those topics that is brought up at that time, because they'll be making those sorts of decisions when they are formulating their advanced directives. So it actually can be made very early on. It's whether that patient is ready to have that conversation or not, right? So we always just test the waters. What questions do you have about it? Lots of people are out there on the internet, and the internet can be a big, scary place if you are going to unreputable sites, or reading the worst of the worst and that sort of thing. And so I just want to meet them where they are and answer the questions that they have, and maybe give them some reputable sites that they can go to, some information about what our patients have done in the past, and just really educate them so that they feel like they're making very logical decisions and feel like they have all of the education surrounding their decision, and not making an uneducated decision about what they want to do at the end of life.
And I imagine that a lot of people have not thought about advanced directives until they have a diagnosis like ALS, right? I mean, maybe it's under appreciated and not done enough in regular life, including people like me, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think that lots of people and our society in general doesn't like to talk about death, right? We kind of shy away from death and dying, and it's a taboo topic, so to speak. And so a lot of people, if they do feel like they're healthy, well, why would I ever need an advanced directive? And so I try to clarify that as well. It really is important. I always gave the example, which has nothing to do with ALS, but I had a family member one time tell me that her son went away to college in another state, and he was 18, so an adult, and he went for a routine dental procedure, and in the dental chair he had a seizure. And so the dentist called 911, obviously, and he was taken to the hospital. And when he got there, the seizure left him unconscious, right? He was not able to talk on the phone or communicate or anything like that. And his mom called the hospital asking for his condition, and they would not release any information to her because he was an adult over the age of 18, and he did not have an advance directive stating who his power of attorney was for medical decisions. And it was, very alarming to her as a mom, but also made her very aware that, uh-oh, my son is an adult at 18, and these kinds of papers need to be done in these situations where somebody needed to make his medical decisions because he was not able to do so. So I use that example of anything could happen at any time, even if you're only 18 years old. And would you want somebody else to be able to make those sorts of decisions for you? So we talk about advanced directives early on, but lots of times I uh, meet patients who have ALS who already have an advanced directive, but once they get an ALS diagnosis, those advanced directives that they have in place very much change than with an ALS diagnosis. And so they want to revisit what they thought they wanted at end of life, and now that has all changed because of an ALS diagnosis. So it definitely is a discussion that needs to happen even if someone already has that in place.
I remember my first clinic visit here because a lot of us, when they join ALS United Mid Atlantic, we have attended a clinic visit or a mock clinic visit or met patients, and there was a discussion with someone about a pig tube. And for him, it was a scary situation because that would be scary. And the doctor and nurse explained that it was very common. It's just talking about it now. So do those things help to change those conversations about advanced directives? Because something that seemed scary and very difficult, now you've said that it's not as difficult. Maybe it's easier for their quality of life, so they have a new appreciation for what's available.
Yes, very much so. And I'm glad you brought up feeding tubes as well, because many patients, if they already have an advanced directive before they get an ALS diagnosis, there are many people who will say they don't want a feeding tube simply because they feel as though a feeding tube sustains life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Typically it would. It's providing nutrition and hydration and those sorts of things. But I always tell an ALS patient, in the case of ALS, we are putting a feeding tube in because we need an alternate way to get your nutrition and hydration in. It is not prolonging your life. Your ALS is still progressing at the same rate. We're not slowing down your ALS. We are giving you an alternate way to get your nutrition and hydration in, because typically you're having problems with your swallowing, problems with choking, those sorts of things. And it may be a scary process to eat a meal. And maybe you're losing weight and you're having more issues with energy and feeling very fatigued because you're just not getting those calorie requirements in. So when we explain to them that it is simply an alternate way to get that nutrition and hydration in rather than by mouth, then it changes their whole aspect. As well as I always tell a patient, if you ever get to an end of life situation with your ALS and you do have a feeding tube, you always have a right to say that you want to stop using that feeding tube as
Mm-hmm.
well. There's no one that is going to tell you that you have to continue to use it. In the state of Arizona here, we work with many hospices, and they all are very understanding and willing to have a patient say, I've decided I don't want you to use that feeding tube anymore for nutrition or hydration. And they are all very willing to honor that wish. So I think when patients understand that they can stop using it at any time as well, that they're much more agreeable to the reason why we suggest the feeding tube in the first place, that it's more a quality of life issue than a life sustaining issue.
And I was thinking of what you're saying in terms of easing those conversations. How important are events like we have through ALS United Mid Atlantic, that you have at ALS Arizona, or support groups where people with ALS and their caregivers see others with ALS? How important are those events to demystify some of those care products? So when they see other people with ALS, they see, okay, they're living and thriving with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, especially when you're newly diagnosed. I think one of the biggest things that we hear from newly diagnosed patients when we bring up a support group, for instance, is, oh, I don't want to go to the support group because I'm going to see people that are worse than me. And so anytime that we have a new patient that comes to a support group, one of the things that I want to try to do is not only have everybody introduce themselves, but have each person tell where they are in their disease process so that everybody can see, like, hey, I'm in this power wheelchair, but I just got back from a cruise, or, I have a feeding tube, but we're going to Disney World next week, or, whatever it is, so that those patients still can see the many different stages um, that you might go through with ALS, and just because somebody has a feeding tube doesn't mean that you ever will. There are lots of similarities, but also every patient is unique in their disease process. And so I think it's important for every patient to kind of see that we're all different, but we're all living with it. And these are the ways that we live with it. I think that's what makes our support group so special to the patients, is seeing that there are other people that are like me, but there are other people that are not like me, and they're still living life. So that's very important for us to kind of acknowledge that at our events, and see how people are handling the quality of life aspect of living with disease.
Now, one of my favorite people in my life who has ALS and has, excuse me, a ventilation of some kind, he goes to hockey, he goes to football games, he goes to baseball games, he goes to more things than I have in my life, and he's met so many celebrities because he goes out and he does things, and he's a great example not just for ALS but for anybody. And I'm sure you have seen some really inspirational and stories that kind of keep you going when you see what people have done when they've gotten your support.
Yes, very much so. And I really think that the people that are the most outgoing and productive are the ones that end up having the highest quality of life. And so we use those as examples for other patients. You can still be living with ALS. You don't have to have ALS rule your life. And so, we're very focused on having adaptive activities and making sure that patients can understand that even if you can't walk anymore. In January, we took patients skiing, and they were thrilled with that. And so never underestimate what you still can do, for sure.
So when it comes to mechanical ventilation, it's not like you can just go into the clinic one day and you have it all taken care of, right? Like it takes some time. How long is that process to go from consultation to getting everything you need for mechanical ventilation?
Yeah, so one of the things that I talk to patients about to start out with is, you have to decide, do I want this or not want this? And if we are considering getting mechanical ventilation, then the next step is to say, do I want to live at home with mechanical ventilation, or am I living somewhere else? If we're going down the road of living at home, then who are those caregivers going to be, right? I tell patients all the time that just because that machine is breathing for you, you must have a caregiver 24/7. There are lots of bells and whistles and things that have to be watched all the time. And so you cannot be unattended when you are ventilated. So you need to have somebody caregiving for you. And many times, the patient will say, well, I have my spouse. We're retired, and I have my spouse. And I said, that's fantastic, but your spouse needs to sleep, right? So who's going to care for you when your spouse is sleeping? Even if it's for a minimum of 8 hours, who's going to be that person so that your caregiver can get that rest? What if your caregiver gets sick? COVID is still out there. What if it's the flu? What if your caregiver needs a routine surgery, like a knee replacement or, whatever? So when we're talking about going home, I'm always asking them to have 3 or 4 people in mind that are caregivers so that you have a backup after backup after backup. Those people need trained to know how to care for you, know what all those bells and whistles are for, that sort of thing. If you don't have the family or friends or that sort of thing for the caregiving, then what is the cost, number one, for the nurse that comes out? In the state of Arizona, we only have 2 agencies that have vent trained nurses. So as big as Phoenix is, that's pretty few to only have 2 that are available. And a lot of patients don't necessarily realize that they might not live in an area where there is a nurse available. So scope that out, right? Do your homework and find out if you know that you want to go home and you know that you need caregiving and you have to pay for it. Number one, can you afford it? Because it's not covered by insurance typically. And number two, is that agency in an area that will cover where you live? And the reason why I bring that question up is because I've literally had patients who thought they were going to go home and then they found out there were no vent trained nurses in their city and they had no one to care for them. So it comes up. In Phoenix, the vent trained nurses start at $85 an hour. That gets very costly very quickly. So I have that discussion with them. You have to understand the cost. If you decide that you don't have the caregivers and you want to go into a facility, there are very few facilities here, even in Phoenix, that will take ventilators. So do your homework. Go to those facilities. Do you even want to live in a facility like that? We have 2 in Phoenix, and both of them start at $900 a day, and that's for a semi-private room. So there is cost incurred with having mechanical ventilation. And I think that that is a huge decision to make that doctors do not discuss with patients, is the financial aspect of it. And it has to be brought up. Do you have the financial means, whether you're at home or go to a facility, to be able to pay for the care that you need on a mechanical ventilator? Now, the patients that we have here in the state that are on mechanical ventilation, they are at home and they have family that is taking care of them. So there isn't as much money coming out because they have multiple family and friends that are taking care of them. But it still requires a lot of work, right? To make sure that you are cared for all the time. And even though you're being cared for, those family members are giving up other things, their life, vacations, all of those sorts of things. So how do we give back to them? Have you allowed for time if your adult son or daughter want to take their kids to Disney World, or that sort of thing? Consider those sorts of things. The other thing that I tell them that they have to consider, and this is never a fun discussion, but there are many people who say, yes, I want mechanical ventilation. I've got everything lined up. This is what we're going to do. I have all my caregivers, but they never decide when is the time where quality of life is such that I do not want to be mechanically ventilated anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is an important discussion to have before you get ventilated. I just recently went out to see a patient who's been ventilated for 3 years. She never had the discussion with her family, and she is unable to use her eye gaze device now. And she is left with using her eyes to basically her family holds up their hands and she can look at one hand for yes and look at one hand for no. So we're only able to ask yes or no questions, but they don't know whether she feels like she has adequate quality of life anymore,
Hmm.
and they don't know what to do. And so I always tell patients, this is a consideration. Do you want to leave your family in that place where they don't know what to do? If you don't, then make the decision now. When does quality of life become such that you do not want to live this way anymore? That's what you need to tell your family. And that's a very hard discussion to have, not only for me with a patient, but that patient having that discussion with their family. And sometimes families don't like to hear what the patient has to say,
Yeah.
but it is important to have that discussion, so that when that time comes, the family doesn't have any guilt. They're able to say, this is what mom wanted, we're following her wishes, that sort of thing. So it's not just having the discussion of, do you want mechanical ventilation? It's also, is there ever a point in time where you would not want this anymore? And what do you want your family to do at that point in time? So it becomes a much bigger discussion as well.
I was talking with a friend today who has a father who just had a stroke, and they were uh, advocating for their father and the facility he's in. And I know from my own family experience about my mom and my aunt advocating for my grandmother when she had Parkinson's. Do you help to talk to those caregivers about how they can advocate for their loved one, like to say, to make those hard decisions and one way or another? Just like, I know these are really hard conversations, but when you're talking with a healthcare facility or another doctor, here's what you could be prepared to do so you can help to educate them and make them good advocates.
Yes, definitely. I'm also a board certified patient advocate, so I definitely will have that conversation with families and say to them, even if you don't know the answers, I'm not here to help you come to a decision. I'm here to help you ask the right questions so that you can come to your own decision. There are lots of questions to ask medical professionals that families don't think about because they're very emotional at the time. But there are key questions that can help them make a decision. So I definitely give them those questions so that they feel as though they are better educated when they do have to make a decision. Sometimes doctors cannot be very forthcoming. For instance, a doctor might come in and say, well, you need this surgery. And people just say, okay, well, the doctor says I need this surgery. But my question is, okay, well, what if I don't get the surgery? What would be the outcome if I didn't get the surgery? If I'm in pain right now and the doctor says I need surgery, in my mind, that surgery is going to alleviate the pain. But I want the patient to ask, is the surgery really going to do that, or am I still going to be in pain? Right? That might change my mind about whether I really want the surgery or not. What's the percentage of success? All those sorts of things that I think sometimes patients don't think to ask. They just assume that when the doctor says, you need this, I should do it. So I just give them a few extra questions so that they feel as though they're making an educated decision, regardless of whether it's what the doctor wants. It may not be what the doctor's suggesting, but they're asking some questions so that they can formulate their own decision, and an educated decision at that.
I have seen some changes in the healthcare system where a lot of people go to a website and they get like an AI chatbot, or maybe they send an email through a portal and they don't know if anyone's answered it. Obviously, you have these connections with patients and their families. How important is it that ALS Arizona, just like here at ALS United Mid Atlantic, has those personal connections for these very sensitive discussions?
I think it's critical. We always offer it to our patients. There are going to be those patients that really don't want to hear it, and so all that we can do is offer and wait until they're ready on their time. But we offer multiple education sessions. I'll do one-on-one consultations with patients. But I think that just having it out there and offering it, our multidisciplinary clinics know that our consultations are available to their patients. We just want to have every patient given the opportunity to have as much education as possible so that they feel like they are making the best decision for themselves.
I think it's so critical, like you said. I know that if something happened in my family, I have so many people around here at ALS United Mid Atlantic and through our whole ALS United network that I could ask for some advice and just to know what questions to ask. Now, we have a lot of events coming up. I know we talked about how that can help to build that community in Arizona. How can people learn more about what you're doing at ALS Arizona and participate in events or ask questions?
Sure. Our website is www.alsaz.org. We do have some activities coming up that are obviously in person, but we do have some education series that we're bringing up just new this year, and we are recording those and putting them on our website. So, for instance, in January, I did a educational series about the 5 wishes, which is an advanced directive that I love, that I use with our patients, and we went through it page by page. We recorded that, and it's up on our website, so anybody can watch that. Every month, I do a webinar of Ask the Nurse. Anybody can join. It doesn't have to be somebody that's in Arizona, and that's on our website too, of the link to join on that. So it's just anybody can come on and ask any questions that they want that are ALS related. So definitely our website has all of those sorts of links, educational webinars or things like that that they want to, or recordings that they want to see.
Well, I really appreciate it, Janie, and it means so much to me, the connections that we have with our families here in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware area, and knowing how personal ALS is to a person living with it and their families. So it's very rewarding to me to know that they're getting the same kind of care and attention in Arizona from people like you. I really appreciate you connecting with me. And please, if you're listening, you can go to our website at alsmidatlantic.org, or you can look up and follow ALS AZ and all the work that Janie's doing with ALS Arizona. Thank you, Janie. I look forward to seeing what more you guys do in the weeks, months, and years to come to care for ALS families.
Yes, thank you so much.